Hello, everybody. Great. Welcome to my fellow panelists and everybody who's joining us from wherever you are in the world. Welcome to NACW 2021 Virtual Style. I'm Katie Sullivan, Managing Director at the International Emissions Trading Association, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. While preparing for today's panel, it dawned on me that last year's NACW was one of the first major conferences for our community that got canceled. It was very sad and unfortunate, but I want to share a special shout out to the team at CAR. Because it was tough to go through that cancellation, but you really made the most of bringing a great series of dialogues and exchanges virtually throughout 2020. And you've also done a really impressive job with the program for NACW 2021. But I do think I probably speak for everybody when saying that hopefully NACW 2022 will bring us all together live again, or maybe in some hybrid format. I am really looking forward to getting back to somewhere in sunny California, be it in San Francisco, LA, San Diego, whoever. I just can't wait to get back to that West Coast. So today, not a lot happening on climate change today. Just kidding. It was a huge day, obviously, day one of the Climate Leaders Summit. We had a flood of new NDCs and climate announcements that occurred earlier today. And I think a lot of us are still digesting, what was announced. The opening plenary for NACW that happened before this session, we had Peter, Dirk, Lisa, and Jean. They had a great discussion about some of the highlights from the summit, but also some thoughts as we head through COP26 at the end of the year. But now, with help from my great panel of expert speakers, we'll do a stock take of the role of carbon markets across North America, so Canada, United States, and Mexico. And we'll also think about what to watch as we head through the rest of the year and 2022. So just some housekeeping, Q&A. Don't be shy. Feel free to send some questions or comments through into the Q&A over the course of the session. We only have an hour. And if we have some time, by the end of the session, or I should say towards the end, if there's anybody who wants to go live on cam, you can submit a request. So we'll see if we have time for that. But certainly keep those kind of questions, comments rolling through. We'll get to as many as we can over the course of the hour. So let's take a moment to introduce the great panelists that we have here today. We have Michael Berends, so Managing Director, Origination at ClearBlue Markets. Mike has a number of years, over 15 certainly, in carbon markets, particularly in carbon pricing strategy, offset development, and trading. Prior to ClearBlue, Mike was working at EcoSecurities, Barclays Capital, Vattenfall, the list goes on. Michael has executed thousands of carbon market deals, structuring transactions, and in the primary, secondary carbon markets in over 50 countries. And working with the rest of the ClearBlue team, has developed carbon pricing strategies for numerous large and small emitters, and is also involved in active management of compliance positions. Then we have Katelyn Roedner coming to us from California. Katelyn is the manager, U.S. Climate at Environmental Defense Fund, or EDF. So Katelyn leads EDF's climate work in California, as well as regulatory legislative initiatives on climate across the Western provinces, so Washington, Oregon, and I can't wait to hear more about what's going on in Washington State from Katelyn, among other regions in the U.S. Katelyn does focus on advancing policies that establish and implement long-term greenhouse gas emission reductions and improve local air quality. Prior to joining EDF, I found this interesting, very. Katelyn worked with environmental justice and faith communities on local climate, air quality, and land use issues. So we'll park that for the moment, but we will talk about some of the EJ considerations in carbon markets later on. And then last, but certainly not least, Eduardo Piquero, who's the CEO at Mexico CO2. Eduardo has also been in the space for over 15 years with carbon markets across Mexico, Latin America, and internationally. He leads this Mexico CO2 with the Mexican Stock Exchange, where he oversees development environmental markets, and that's carbon, clean energy certificates, and green bond markets. Eduardo has also led the incorporation of CCFV, and this is a Green Finance Advisory Board, a financial-focused NGO to green the Mexican financial system. So I know I probably didn't do you all enough justice with your great bios, but I hope I did the trick to launch us into the brief initial remarks, and then we'll go into moderated discussion, okay? So let's start with Mike Berends. So we'll go north to south. We'll start with Canada. Mike, I know you have a couple of slides, so maybe you wanna try putting those up for now. And
yep.
I'll just
Thanks,
start.
Katie, for the intro. I'm gonna try to get that up.
Yeah. Okay, so quick segue here. Our Prime Minister, so I'm Canadian, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he announced Canada's updated NDC today. That was the big news. And it's 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. But man, oh man, Mike, has it been nutty on the Canadian carbon pricing side of things. So a lot of good things have occurred, more stability than we've probably ever had before, but also some major question marks related to policy, politics, program, certainly post 2022. So why don't I give it over to you to set the scene, provide the landscape and what to watch for.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks a lot, Katie. Thanks for the very kind introduction. You see the slide deck okay, yeah? It's working?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. Thanks a lot. So yeah, definitely, it's a perfect segue into the first slide. In many ways, there's definitely more certainty, but at the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty in exactly what carbon pricing will look like going forward. This map here is something that we like to show when we're talking to our clients or talking to others about the market, and I think it's a great example of just showing you how different and how all over the place carbon pricing is in Canada today. We like to call it a patchwork of programs, and these things are still going to be changing. But behind it all, what we've seen was the recent announcement of the Supreme Court case, which made it very clear that the federal government has the authority to implement or enforce carbon pricing on the different jurisdictions. And we're seeing that actually happen now. There's been a lot of changes through the years about what carbon pricing looks like in the different jurisdictions, but I think it's very clear now that carbon pricing, at least, and we'll talk about the changes that we heard recently from the other parties, but as long as the Liberals were in power, carbon pricing was here to stay across Canada. And then the big question was, what would that carbon pricing look like in each jurisdiction? And if you look at the map today, you see a number of provinces that have hybrid systems between their own programs and that of the federal government. Some, fully in charge of their own programs, like Quebec, BC, and BC, who've had programs for many years, and a number of programs that are starting to get their new programs up in place. And Ontario is a very good example, which we'll talk about as we go. In the path that they've had over the last few years and some of the big milestones that they've achieved recently, and some of the things that we think might happen going forward now that we're getting more of this certainty, both from the courts and from the other political parties in Canada that are deciding that, okay, carbon pricing is something that we need to have if we want to be leaders and get voted into power in Canada. So I think, Katie, you're very well aware of what happened recently with the announcement of the Supreme Court. Battle between a few provinces and the federal government, a long process with a big decision on March 25th that yes, it's constitutional, and yes, carbon pricing is enforceable by the feds. We've seen now some reactions from the different provinces that currently are using or have the federal system imposed on them, and we've seen, right after that announcement, a number of provincial premiers saying, okay, we're going to take control and change our own programs in place, especially on the emitter side. So that's something we're watching closely, and we'll talk about that and what it can mean going forward, especially in regards to pricing. And the unique one being Quebec, which has a price today currently around $23, where most other jurisdictions have a carbon price of around $40, which is set by the federal government. And on that note, I'll move to the next slide, which here shows you the trajectory of what looks like from the federal level going forward. And I think after the announcement that they had with the Supreme Court case, I think around Christmas time, the feds came out with a new pricing forecast of what they see past 2022. And previous to this, we had a price forecast that we knew was going to be $50 up into 2022. But now we're seeing a higher price. Up to $170 by 2030, and that's really causing a lot of the provinces to think about what kind of carbon pricing program do they want to have, because there are some unique exceptions by the federal government today about, if you have a carbon price-based program, you must follow the federal government's pricing trajectory, and if you don't, if you have, for example, a cap and trade program, as long as you meet other equivalent requirements, then pricing level, which is exactly what we see in Quebec. And just going back, I'll remind the price in Quebec is $23 versus $40, for example, in Ontario. And I think in today's conversation, it's very interesting to see this price and what it could have meant for Ontario if they didn't leave cap and trade, which I'll touch on in a slide or two. Katie, you mentioning some of the offset situation in Canada, at least from the federal government. The issue there is that it's actually been very slow to progress. We've had the federal carbon pricing program in Canada by the feds since January 1st, 2019. Emitters are allowed to use in the first 3 years, and then the last year 75%. But in the first 3 years, they're allowed to use 100% of their offsets for their compliance needs. Unfortunately, the offset program is still in development. It's still being finalized. We have a list of the priority protocols that recently came out. These are still being finalized. The end result, though, is there's simply no offset supply in Canada for the demand that's required in the first 2 years that we expect. So we just had our first compliance deadline on April 15th last week under OBPS. That was for 2019. That was delayed because of COVID. We'll have our next one on December 15, 2020. In our view, there'll definitely be no offsets available from the federal system for that demand. Therefore, compliance entities, for the most part, are paying essentially the fee to the federal government. We hope to see some volume come by 2021. We'll see what happens there. But it has been a slow process. And I think many of the people that have been involved with just even the Ontario protocols that were being developed by Cap and Trade, there's been a lot of talk of offsets for the last few years, but not really much development. And we're hoping that changes going forward. Just to continue on, I'm running through this and we'll leave it for some of the questions in the next session. Ontario is a good example of what we've seen in Canada with the uncertainty and the changes over the last few years. And simply put, Ontario's had 3 programs for carbon pricing in essentially the last 4 years. Cap and Trade started in January 2017. It was on its own. It linked to California and Quebec in January 2018, and that didn't last very long. I'm sure many of you are aware. It was basically simply removed very quickly in June of 2018. It left a gap. The logic there at the time by the government was that we're going to remove the carbon tax. But at the same time, the rules that the feds had in place, in which they've won now, and it's much more certain today, was that they were going to impose a carbon price in their system if for any jurisdiction that didn't have a carbon price or program on January 1st, 2019, which was the case in Ontario. So the federal system was imposed. It was there. We have that in place. As I mentioned, the first payment ever for an Ontario emitter, for emitters for carbon pricing was made on April 15th. So last week, even though we've had carbon pricing in Ontario since January 1st, 2017. So that was a big step for carbon pricing in Canada. Ontario was a big part of the Canadian carbon pricing. At the same time, the day before the Supreme Court case last fall, the federal government announced that they would approve the Ontario's new system, which is called the EPS, that they would approve it, that was deemed equivalent. It was a bit of a strange timing, especially the day before the court case. The main issue there was that prior to that, the federal government had been adamant that they were going to keep the federal system in place for 4 years once it started in a jurisdiction, so it provides some certainty. They changed that during the last year. They allowed for the EPS to be implemented, and they finally just recently came out saying that that will be in effect on January 1st, 2022. So all this to say that it's been an interesting path just in Ontario itself. We're seeing some more certainty in that there is going to be carbon pricing in Ontario and the rest of Canada, almost for sure. And that leads to some of the next issues that we're dealing with. Things can come and go. It makes it very difficult for emitters in many jurisdictions to make long-term decisions on based on carbon pricing. This has delayed a lot of the initiatives, but I think some of the announcements we're seeing today will definitely put more pressure on reducing emissions from emitters. The offset, the program itself has been very slow. And we all know that this takes a lot of time for developers to actually generate offsets. So this uncertainty has really caused a delay to bring offsets into these systems. And more interestingly is, what will these systems look like in a few years if the provinces decide to take their own programs? Will there be a need for a federal offset program? And more importantly then is, will there be fungibility from any offset program that's created from the federal level into the different jurisdictions? So this is something we're watching closely. And one thing that we'll talk about a bit more is the cap and trade. The fact is that in Quebec today, as I mentioned, it's $23 a ton for CO2. So when you fill up your car at the gas tank or the gas station, or you pay your natural gas bill, the ton of CO2 costs are $23 versus here in Ontario where I pay $40. This is considered to be equivalent as a program for other reasons. So the question is, will other provinces go to, or in Ontario's case, try to go back to a cap and trade program? And will the federal government keep those rules in place? And if not, what is the impact on Quebec? I think that's a big question as well. Will Quebec be forced to change their price? And if that's the case, what impact will that have on their linkage with California? So I think the big news as I go through all these changes that we're seeing in Canada is that for the first time, essentially for the first time, the Conservative government last week, I believe it was, came out with their climate plan, which included carbon pricing. And that was a big step for carbon pricing in Canada. And I think I was discussing with the group before that, prior to this, when we were looking at long-term price forecasts, what could carbon pricing be in Canada? The reality was it could be zero or it could have been 170 because of the different politics behind it. And I think today it's safer to say, it can be 30 or it could be 170 in 2030 because there is commitment from all parties in Canada at the federal level to have a carbon price. So that's going to be a big step. A few little notes: the Ontario NDP have actually said themselves directly that if they are in leaders of Ontario when the next election comes up, I believe that would be a year or two, they would bring back cap and trade. So it's not just the price levels that we're seeing other politics, other groups saying that they may bring back cap and trade. So something very important to watch closely as we go forward. But I think at the end of the day, what's most important is that we start bringing more certainty to these markets, and most importantly to emitters, to actually get to the targets and all these announcements that have been made over the last few days. Excellent announcements, but they need certainty to understand what are they facing going forward. So I think, Katie, I'll leave it at that. I ran through that, I hope, on time, and I'll leave questions for later.
You captured a lot of great info in a very brief amount of time. Thank you so much, Mike, for making it or keeping it succinct. I do want to just say it is interesting that when Canada put forward its proposed 2030 plan, including that escalating carbon price to 170 by 2030, a number of us went, ooh, cap and trade's looking really good right about now. If that is what provincially they could choose that option versus, the fixed price or escalating price backstop to 2030. So thank you very much. And don't go anywhere, Mike. Time to go to the United States. Can I just say, Katelyn, that I had so many feelings today, but probably one of the biggest feelings was just like, oh my God, how beautiful is it to have the United States back at the table in such a big way and recognized. So could you start us off with just high level what came out at the updated NDC, for the US, and then we'll dig into California, a bit on Washington, and if you don't mind, a bit on what's going on Northeast would be great, just Red Sheet TCI.
Yeah, I agree with you, Katie. It's been a day of a lot of feelings. Just wonderful, wonderful news coming out of the federal government with the Biden administration's new NDC. 50 to 52% reduction below 2005 levels by 2030. I mean, a goal that aligns with what science demands. I mean, after the last 4 years, to have science-based goals again is just really exciting. It's a credible, achievable goal. It puts the United States in the top tier of climate commitments. I mean, it's a really, really good day. And it feels really good to say that the United States is really all in on climate. And that's been a while. So that's been really a highlight of the day, and just very, very great feelings around that. At the same time, we still are seeing a lot of action at the state level, which is fantastic. And one of the states that I'm also having lots of feelings about lately is Washington State, who has, as we've talked about, broken our hearts before, and once again is making a really credible and aggressive run at a cap and invest program. And we're going to need states like Washington and California to help meet the federal goals. And Washington is hopefully in the next few days going to get across the finish line and adopt a cap and invest program that is, really, I think, best in class. I mean, it builds on a lot of the great things that California has developed. It has some great air quality provisions in it. And it, could be capable of linking with WCI. So we'll see if in the next few days that we can make something happen in Washington. It's exciting, certainly. That's a little stressful too. So add that to the list of feelings for this particular day. And then, of course, there is California. And, the last year in California, like everywhere, has seen a lot of ups and downs, both in our broader economy and certainly in the carbon market as well. If you look back to a year ago, that would have been May 2020, we saw really low demand at the May auction, just due to the broader economic uncertainty from COVID. And then, of course, by November and then February, we were seeing a lot more optimism, and the market really was strengthening again. Auctions were a lot more robust. And that coincides with the economy reopening, vaccines becoming more widely available. As we look forward, looking to this coming May 2021, we'll see at auction the return of some previously unsold allowances. So there's going to be a much higher volume offered. But again, the economy is continuing toward reopening. The governor has a goal of June 15th for having everything fully reopened. I think I just saw the other day that California has the lowest infection rate in the United States. So, there's a lot of good progress. Vaccinations are widespread. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, and we really could see all of that additional volume in May be absorbed. So that's, another, I guess, highlight on the horizon in terms of just the strength of the California program. The CARB rulemaking. So I guess before I get into rulemakings, I'll start with the scoping plan. Starting in the next month or so, California will embark on its scoping plan update. First, they are reconvening their Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and then we'll start on the process of updating what is basically the climate change strategic plan for the state. And that will sort of go through all of the suite of policies in California that contribute to the state meeting its 2030 and then 2045 greenhouse gas reduction goals. This scoping plan will be kind of interesting. It'll focus on, or have an additional focus, I should say, on natural and working lands for the first time. And so really taking a truly economy-wide approach to achieving our carbon neutrality goal out by 2045. That whole process takes about a year and a half. So the scoping plan update should conclude late 2022. And then rulemakings will either be alongside the scoping plan or following the scoping plan. From EDF's perspective, I really see it as important that California start on a cap and trade rulemaking before the scoping plan update ends. And the reason being is, we have a long way to go in the next 9 years now before 2030. Not just in terms of, the state has a really strong 2030 goal, but just from the climate perspective. that we have a finite amount of time to make a really significant impact in the next decade. And we can't wait until 2023 after the scoping plan to start a year-long process. And I think, that emissions cap is just essential and has the capability to drive a lot of emission reductions that we're going to need in the coming decade. Let's see. So I did federal, Washington, California. We can zoom over to the coast. There's Reggie and TCI and lots of exciting things going on there. Reggie is in the process of adding its third state in the last 4 years. So that's some real momentum on the East Coast, which is really exciting. Governor Cooper in North Carolina has the potential to be the fourth. So there's even more momentum there. And then of course we can dig into TCI too a little bit later on. But yeah, so there's good news from the federal level, the state level. It's an exciting day for climate action and carbon markets in the United States. So I'll stop there with all of my.
Okay. What a difference a year makes, even a few months. Little sunny spots all over the place. It's great. Thank you. And I know lots to cover, but we'll try to get back to a few of those issues and more later. But we will now go to Mexico. So Eduardo Piquero, I've known you for a number of years, my friend. And earlier today, we had Trudeau. We had, the US, and then we had Mexico, updated NDCs. Then I cut to Mexico and I went, I didn't really get the news that I was hoping for but maybe I missed it. So if you could unpack what we should be really caring about, because Mexico does have an updated NDC. It just might not have been featured as clearly earlier today, right?
That is correct, Katie. Thank you very much. Lots of things going forward and going on south of the border, also sharing optimism and preparing for supply to the big neighbor in the north. We're sure we can supply the big neighbor in the north with lots of offsets. So that's a bright spot for today. Yes, definitely today's intervention of the Mexican president perhaps wasn't what expected, but let me tell you a couple of things about Mexican NDCs that were submitted in December last year. They include and they make reference to the Mexican emissions trading scheme several times. So it kind of shields the ETS moving forward in the future. So future administrations inevitably will have to look into emissions trading as a source of getting to the Paris goals. So we're very happy for that. But one big intervention that perhaps had a lot to do with Mexico was Biden's. It definitely makes the case for Mexico to look into its own industry. Not only the United States is our most important customer, but also is Mexico the largest trading partner for the US. So it depends on the time of the year, but yes, sometimes it is. So we do have lots of challenges in mobility. Mexico is a large car making industry, and lots of things will happen inevitably. Agriculture, again, a large source of emission reductions, and of course, energy. Mexican president made reference to hydrocarbons. Unfortunately, perhaps Mexico won't comply with his plans and probably move forward with electromobility and perhaps being a large solar supplier for the industry. As a matter of fact, the ETS is moving forward, perhaps slower than we would have expected. We're about to publish the protocols for offsets. Lots of things are going on there. The protocol for forestry is finished or about to be finished. There is also a protocol for agriculture and landfills. That's something that we will also see during 2021, and transport. Plans are also for this year to be the year for auctions, not to carry on the first auction, but develop the whole system to make the first auction during 2022. The private sector is very supportive of the system. With the announcements today, will either be more supportive. So we're pretty happy about it. perhaps is the only good news we can tell you from Mexico. Some other parts of policy may not be as green as we would have expected, but that's definitely something. The Mexican government is also moving forward with the registry. So perhaps you won't find any transactions today, nor prices today, but definitely will happen during this year. We do have some prices for offsets. There is forward transactions of offsets that we already know that they're out there. And with the protocols already published, they will mostly be from covered entities and so forth. The deployment of the energy strategy of the US to comply with its new 2030 targets will definitely affect Mexico. And personally, I'm very happy about it, but they will affect Mexico. So that's also very good news. On another note, COVID-19 has impacted very heavily Mexico's national and subnational budgets. That's probably the main reason for many subnational entities to develop carbon pricing instruments. We already have 4 Mexican states with carbon taxes. We do have Tamaulipas, close to Texas, Baja California, close to California on the other side, Zacatecas, a very heavily mining state, and the state of Tequila, Jalisco. And already at least 5 different jurisdictions, including some of the top largest Mexican states, preparing what's going to look like for their carbon instruments. Mostly think about their incomes from taxes being heavily hit by COVID-19. South of Mexico, a lot of things going on. Panama and the Dominican Republic with plans to develop emissions trading scheme. That's something very, very brand new and very happy for that. Colombia also moving forward with emissions trading scheme and with their very successful carbon tax. Chile, including offsets to pay its own carbon tax from 2021. Argentina talking on carbon pricing at the subnational level. Very good news. I'm Argentina, very good news. And Brazil also talking about emissions trading with Minister Guedes announcing the plans for Brazil to develop an ETS, at least at a policy level. And with RenovaBio, that's a clean energy standard and transaction scheme also already developed and in place. So lots of things happening in Latin America with the US moving forward. Many things will happen south of the border. So it's a very bright Earth Day. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Eduardo. And really important for everybody to acknowledge some of these important things that are developing that are not maybe being communicated that frequently or to the broader community, let's say, beyond Mexico. So that's really important. And also, I know that there's going to be a number of people, including Carr, around this protocol update that you've shared in Mexico. And so it's interesting when you think about, okay, Mexico moving forward with these compliance grade offsets, right, for its cap and trade system. And you said landfill, forestry, transportation over the coming, weeks or months. And Mike, with the federal system, and we all know that there might be some delays or snags, but you did put forward those 4 project types for the federal Canadian offset system. And that the federal offset draft regulations, that's out for consultation right now, to be clear. 5th of May is the deadline, so there's still time. So if we go back up just quickly, Mike, and think about the offset stuff, you went through that really, really quickly. But I want to maybe drive home a bit, or if you can, drive home just the offset opportunities. I mean, you're engaging with a lot of your clients, right, across Ontario and elsewhere. And Ontario has not yet made a decision, right, to or not to allow some kind of offset trading program, provincially administered or piggyback off the feds, right? So just a bit about Ontario and why it matters so much and what could be decided over the coming months, literally, around like offsets to use, not to use, and what the future has in store. Yeah,
sure. So thanks, Katie. I'd be surprised. I'll call it now. I've been wrong a few times on Ontario carbon pricing, but including getting rid of cap and trade so quickly. But I would be surprised if whatever program is in place in Ontario, let's say starting next year, that offsets are not part of that program. The fact is that the 5 pages that we have today for EPS, that's the new Ontario program that will start on January 1st, 2022. That was created very quickly. That was created to have a program in place for the court cases to say, yes, Ontario has created an emitter program, but there's not much meat to that regulation, if you will. So there's a lot to be done. And actually the draft regulations for that program did have offsets in it. And I think they understood that, offsets can be an interesting thing, as we can see by these different perspectives that people have. And I think they didn't want to muddy the regulations for the court cases, so they took it out. But emitters want access to offsets. There's no doubt about that. And they see the benefit of offsets of a highly credible, with strong environmental credibility behind it. They want those offsets. And I think that message will be made clear as the discussions go further in what will the Ontario program look like. Even if that Ontario program looks like the EPS they've said today, I'd be surprised if provinces don't start looking at the cap and trade programs like we see in Quebec for many reasons. Even Alberta's indicated that, and there's been a lot of misconception about this gets into Canadian politics that Quebec is being treated in a special way because it's Quebec. That's just false. That's completely false. Ontario would be looking exactly the same as Quebec if Ontario did not remove cap and trade. So we need to get away from this. Quebec has special treatment. That's not true. Anyone with a cap and trade program, even Nova Scotia, which has one, has that same flexibility for pricing, for other things they want to take control of. So I fully expect that provinces, if they want to look at what emitters want, what is probably most cost effective, and the best way to achieve overall targets, will start looking at things like offsets if they aren't.
So it's what, like, the whole discussion here is really the continent, North America. And, Eduardo, you say, well, Mexico wants to be a supplier of offsets. Well, I think Canada wants to be a buyer and a supplier of offsets. Everybody, but here is we are at a moment where a lot of these protocols and standards are being done, and hopefully done in a way that's aligned, right? And maybe common infrastructure. So that fungibility across borders, that could be a reality quite soon. And that, we're fingers crossed, we see it more and more, not just with Quebec and California. Katelyn, California. Speaking of, I first of all want to, just to make it clear to the audience, we were all so happy around 2017 when we got that cap and trade extension. We do not yet have that though, for post 2030. Is that right?
Yeah. That being said, we have a 2045 executive order for carbon neutrality economy-wide. And a limit on carbon emissions is the best way to ensure that you are going to meet goals like that. And so it's hard for me to imagine not having a firm declining limit on carbon emissions to help get us to that 2045 goal. So I think watch this space is what I'll say.
Okay. Okay, so this is a biggie, environmental justice. Yeah. So important. And again, after reading your bio, knowing that you actually come from that community, and so just such authentic experience in it. But it has been, say, a bit more challenging to communicate or make those links between, the environmental justice space and how these programs and markets can actually support that and deliver some of those goals. But I'd love for you to actually just provide that the current environmental justice landscape in California and elsewhere, how important it is, how you're engaging in it, what we all need to be really aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just California. The environmental justice movement has been gaining momentum for the last 30 years, and I think is really at a really impressive point right now. And they have made their political power known, and and that's not just California. And I should say, I used to work in environmental justice communities directly, and with those communities, I obviously can't speak as an environmental justice advocate today, but in the past have had that experience. And I think with respect to markets and environmental justice, we know that at its core, climate change is a problem of pollution. And we know that a limit on carbon emissions is the most effective way to drive down greenhouse gas emissions on this time and scale that we need. But we also know that it is predominantly low-income communities and communities of color that bear a disproportionate burden of local air pollution. The American Lung Association, I think it was just today, actually, in all of the news today, they just put out their State of the Air report. And some of those findings, really shouldn't be surprising to us, that in the United States, people of color are over 60% more likely to live in a county with a failing grade from the American Lung Association. And so what this means is that our carbon markets, one of our really key tools to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals, also have to be designed to deliver reductions in locally harmful air pollution. We have to do both, because we don't have time to wait in addressing climate, but we also don't have any time to wait in addressing the local air pollution that's making communities sick today. So we have to do it all. We have to make sure that our policies can achieve both. And the good news is I think that's totally possible. We're seeing equity innovation, I know you asked about California, and a lot of this is true in California, but Washington is also really doing some interesting equity innovations in their proposed legislation, or in their proposed program. They have, alongside the Cap and Invest program, the regulator has to identify overburdened communities, much like California did with its CalEnviroscreen. They have to deploy air pollution monitoring in all of those communities. They have to, every 2 years, evaluate if local air pollution is decreasing. And if it's not, then the regulators have to place additional requirements on facilities that are contributing to the cumulative pollution burden, which can actually include potentially limiting the use of offsets by those facilities. So this is a really, really, I think, interesting and important step forward to connect global climate pollution with local pollution burden and make sure that we're addressing them together. And I think that's where we need to be looking as we expand carbon markets and design new carbon markets across North America.
Thank you, Katelyn. And that was very well said, and a little plug, at least with IETA and my colleague Clayton Munnings. One of our signature pieces for 2021 is around that role, or connecting those dots between cap and trade and supporting environmental justice, with a lot of learnings coming to California, but certainly for an audience that transcends just California and elsewhere. So thank you for that. Keep the questions coming in. We are not ignoring them, and we are going to get to some of the big ones at least. But Eduardo, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot with this, and this will go to maybe some other panelists as well. But I certainly think that through NAFTA, USCMA, pan-continental lens, border carbon adjustments coming up. And what we're seeing in Europe, there's this clear linkage with the EU emissions trading system and carbon pricing system there. I mean, Mike, kind of dying for your latest on we had the budget come out, but I mean, how is the community, be it the business or government community in Mexico, thinking about the border carbon adjustment issue, threat, carbon club, opportunities to prevent any kind of, tax at the border?
Definitely very, very worrying. It would be very worrying for Mexico, the adoption of a carbon sort of adjustment at the border. But it definitely, again, connecting the dots, it has to do with intelligibility between what's going on north of Mexico and Mexico. We need some degree of collaboration between the Mexican government, Canada, and the US. Definitely that's something that it's out there, and the Ministry of Environment cannot ignore any longer. We need some degree of stronger collaboration. Mexico has worked a lot with California, developing its own ETS. Now we need to start talking about what kind of linkage will there exist between the two systems, or any other north of Mexico. And that includes also the commercial discussion, where the US is definitely with a stronger climate agenda, and Mexico is sat there at the table. We need to have that conversation. It cannot be any longer delayed.
Thank you, Eduardo. Actually, I think just looking at unless, Mike, with the latest Canadian federal budget that came out, there was a line. I mean, it was relatively vague, but it will be a consultation on border carbon adjustments in Canada as we head into the fall. Do you have any, thoughts related to the BCA and how we should kind of expect some, at least scenarios to play out?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, because I've seen some commentary about, well, the U.S. doesn't have a carbon price, so how can they have a border carbon adjustment price? And I thought, okay, well, when we look at the map that I shared earlier, what is Canada's carbon price? It's all over the place. So how are we going to, and where does the border begin? Are there provincial borders for this? Is it one border with the U.S.? So, I think there's a lot of challenges ahead of us for what is a carbon price in Canada to put that on for a border carbon adjustment. So that will be interesting to see. I think there are going to be some things that outside of the carbon pricing in Canada, because we have so many differences, that will need to come together and say, okay, this is what it is, and we're going to have all these adjustments and that. So, I'm not myself an expert yet on that, but just looking on Canada, I'm a bit perplexed of what is our carbon price as a country. So that will be interesting to follow.
Yes, it will.
And maybe the result, and maybe a bit of the end game. Hopefully, one day we do have one carbon market. The EU can do it. That's what always amazes me. The EU can do it with how many countries and how many different countries, but we can't even do it in Canada. And that's what's always been. I was based in Europe for many years, and I was always impressed with how they can do it. And now we see a very successful market. It's clear what the carbon price is there at the border for Europe. Why can't we do that in Canada is a question I've been asking.
Mm-hmm. I won't say any. Watch this space. Okay, Katelyn, another big piece of news. So we two big legal things that occurred is Supreme Court case in Canada, 25th of March. All right. Also, yesterday filed. Katelyn, do you want to just share very briefly the highlights with the DOJ lawsuit?
Yeah, it's amazing that this isn't the maybe headliner news, but yeah. So the lawsuit by the former Trump administration against the collaboration between California and Quebec in their carbon market has been dismissed. The Biden administration has said, we thought this might happen, but has said that they are not pursuing this challenge. So I mean, it's really great news. I mean, it was a how could I say this politely, a kind of foolish lawsuit in the first place, and an attempt to block state level action on addressing climate change, on addressing public health, and the courts shot it down at every turn. So it's also an exciting day to see that the Biden administration is going to respect state action and state partnerships, and is continuing to support state leadership here. So it's a good day.
It's a good day.
Can I jump in on? Sorry, Katie. Just something that we're finding interesting is the discussion that we're seeing in Quebec right now, with that discussion of having a lower carbon price, and what is that going to look like going forward, and will the federal government of Canada accept that situation they've built themselves, and will they make them change that? And if they do so, would that threaten the linkage with Quebec? And ironically, we may actually have the federal government potentially, I'm not stating this, do exactly what Trump tried to do, is break that linkage, and that would be a shame. Personally, I would So I hope that the federal government really thinks out what they're looking for when it comes to cap and trade, especially in Quebec. They were early movers. They have a strong program with Quebec. I don't think the intention is to harm that linkage, but find a path that doesn't do that will be very important going forward.
Mm-hmm. And this OB, output-based pricing system review process, and the whole benchmark criteria also occurring over the coming months is absolutely critical. Mike. Katelyn, just back to you quickly. There are some questions coming in here that I think it's really important. So first of all, just the federal action, I think are all understand that we're probably not going to see massive congressional, piece of legislation, carbon pricing, nationally. But what could we see then coming out from Congress or the regulatory space as well, right? That could impact, the state level activities and primarily the market like WCI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you've been following some of the news out of the Biden administration, they really talk about this whole of government approach to addressing climate, and I think that's really what we will see. But I mean, that can include executive action if on the power sector, the transportation sector in terms of emissions goals, as well as cutting methane from the oil and gas sector. I think on the legislative side, I think I saw somebody mention, a clean electricity standard, that there's certainly interest in Washington. There's ongoing conversations as well about carbon pricing. I mean, I think that there is a recognition that we need investments to meet our NDC, but in order to do that, we need some revenue to pay for some of those investments. I think there's also recognition that investments are not sufficient and that we do need real policy, and we need ideally an economy-wide limit on carbon emissions. But so there's certainly a recognition that just investing is not going to get us all the way there. And with, doing a price on carbon, I think what we've seen from this administration is that climate policy and economic policy go hand in hand, and they're really the same. They're really the same thing. And so if we can design a policy that is going to invest across the country in addressing health disparities, in addressing workforce development, I think there is interest to be had across the political spectrum. But you're right. Are we going to see, an economy-wide national cap and trade bill adopted out of the Senate next week? Maybe not.
Awesome. Thank you, Katelyn. All right, Eduardo, there are a few questions coming in here, but I think it might, so CORSIA. And it's a great question from Barbara about, okay, well, what about CORSIA, the impact on carbon markets across North America? But I think I might just expand that to also just like the voluntary space, because certainly like, with you and Mexico CO2, you have been a leader in, the entire voluntary space. Well, you have. Yes, you know it, for a while, certainly in Mexico. So, what are you seeing right now with respect to the voluntary, demand, the purchases, that activity and investment, but also, CORSIA as well in Mexico, or you can broaden that to Latin America?
Sure. On the voluntary side, it's been an explosion in Mexico. It has doubled the number of transactions and volume within 1 year. So 2020 was, in spite of all, our best year ever. So extremely very happy for that. And 2021 will probably be even better than 2020. So in that sense, probably never done better. We have some wonderful projects, first ever auction on the voluntary market moving forward. So lots of things going on. And on CORSIA side, it's kind of difficult. Probably Mexican Airlines were very early movers in that sense. They were preparing very heavily for that. Then COVID came and their emissions dropped dramatically. So at least two of the largest airlines, one of them collapsed. The third airline collapsed. It's no longer there. So the airline number one and airline number two, they do have strategies for CORSIA. They're looking for projects, but with no rush. It's understanding that COVID-19 will take a couple of years to build it back, to have the number of operations they did have before. But whatever happens, they do have a strategy to offset their emissions, and we expect to see more in that sense. But additionally, local aviation is one of the sectors, probably the sector that will be added to the ETS once it's revisited in 2023. So they are exactly in line, next in line to be added into the ETS.
Interesting. Oh, okay. Very cool. So actually, I got to ask Mike, and then broader North America, but also even globally, you guys have actually been churning out some great analyses on CORSIA and the voluntary space. So you're thinking about that, but also then the possible interplay with the compliance, pre-compliance, markets or even, offsets demand and what we're seeing. Do you want to share a few quick thoughts, and then we're going to do a lightning round for the last couple of minutes. All right, Mike?
Sure. I'll make it quick, just to reiterate what Eduardo said, that the voluntary market has been, as explosion. That's exactly it. And a lot of interest and even CORSIA, I think maybe the airlines may have missed an opportunity because that they saw COVID happen and they thought, what, there's no rush to do this. And maybe by the time they realized they're in a program which needs these offsets, it might have priced themselves out in many ways what they were expecting. So budgets might be different because the corporate demand for the voluntary offset market is just, it's exploded and in a positive way. And I think, just a couple of things I want to highlight, and especially when it came to the federal offset program in Canada, like these are credible offset programs. The issues that were there and the questions that were raised in 2005 and 2006 and references to certain types of projects in certain countries, we've passed that stage. The regulators get it, and they have a lot of mechanisms in place to deal with that. Just like the ETS had mechanisms in place to deal with projects which were deemed maybe non-additional. They banned certain projects. That happened. That was because these projects these programs need to be dynamic, and they are built that way. So offset programs themselves are not what people think they were 20 years ago. And you know what? 20 years ago, it was a different world. And what we did 20 years ago has placed us to where we are today. And I think that's a good thing. Traveling the world to do clean energy projects, which would never have thought about these projects, but only did so because of offsets. That's a good thing for the bigger picture. So just to take a step back on that, today it's very important for corporates to really understand what it is they're buying. And they do care because they know that they're going to be questioned or called out on it. And, it's not just the cowboy days. People are looking at this with very closely, making very critical decisions, and things will change over time, and they'll also have to change, including offset programs. But the federal program that we have in Canada, we've seen some questions raised about it. I'm dumbfounded because the federal government, maybe it's a slow progress, but part of that is because they are being very rigid in what they allow and how they allow, and the processes behind that, and that's a good thing. So I just want to mention that as well, because we're seeing a lot of noise about offsets, so it's unfounded. It's good that they're looking at it, but let's be clear that the regulators are aware of these issues and they're dealing with them.
We've come a long way in 15,
Yes.
20 years. Yeah, absolutely. And learned along the road. Very well said. Thanks, Mike. So lightning, this is super lightning round now. And Katelyn, we got to go to, because there are a couple of jurisdictions. So we all are watching Washington very closely. We will be, as the Climate Commitment Act goes through, hopefully. Is there anything to watch for Oregon?
Oops, there we go. So Oregon is making right now. I think that is an ongoing process, and a process where there's a lot of stakeholders engaged. I think we would like to see a little bit more ambition out of the Oregon program. I guess that's my lightning round answer.
Okay, I have another one for you. So you briefly touched on it, but another really important one also out for consultation right now, and also featuring a lot of leaning into environmental justice, is the Transportation Climate Initiative Program, TCIP. So do you want to just kind of briefly share just the highlight for the TCI for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really working on this initiative back east, and I think the excitement about it is to be able to cap and reduce emissions specifically from the transportation sector. And if those two programs, RGGI and TCI, could be aligned together, so they could link together, you could sort of capture some of the cost-effective reductions that you could get out of your power sector and use it to fund the transition to a cleaner transportation system, which I think is a really exciting opportunity, and has a really clear benefit for local air quality, especially if we can tackle medium and heavy-duty trucks. I mean, that's a huge impact for local air quality.
Thank you. And that's exactly where I was going, even though my question wasn't exactly clearly formed, but I threw you the ball and you picked it and ran. And that's exactly, with the Regi TCI experience, where at first, they might mirror each other, but not link right away, but at least they'll do so in a manner that could be linkable down the way for, benefits that you clearly mentioned. And maybe with the Regi piece, and then we'll have to wrap. But, Mike, with Regi, it was always, watch, but the price was really low. So, they had one or two offset protocols, but there wasn't a lot of use in the offsets piece. How are you, again, talking to clients who are looking at Regi and, activity in the Northeast?
Yeah, I think the answer is there that the prices were too low, that it wasn't worth putting an offer because it just wasn't viable where they were. But I just checked with the team, and sorry, I'm looking off screen, but the Regi price today was $7.85. So, it used to be, I believe, $2-3 when I was even looking at it as from an offset developer perspective. And that $7.85, that's a start, and it starts to become more interesting from an offset side of things. So I think that was the main driver of why you didn't see offset projects go into the system. And the one project that was put in there, I think I saw the question as well, is maybe it was viable, maybe it was symbolic to be the first trade, but I think the expectation is you'll see more. At the same time, you're going to see them competing with the voluntary market. So that will be very interesting. What prices are the voluntary market going to be for those projects? So the locations and the project type that are eligible for Regi, I believe will be competing with the voluntary market. So it will be interesting.
And, with our space, that regular exchange, the evolution of the space, the exchange of information, and for IETA, we are conveners of dialogue, including, across the Atlantic. And so to see Europe, as older and sophisticated as that program is, they're certainly looking at California and Quebec and TCI as they look to expand, their EU ETS to cover transport and fuels. And so that exchange of all these programs, now up to 60 or 70 carbon pricing systems that exist or under development, there's so much action occurring, but it's so critical to be looking at these lessons learned, best practices. So I'm sorry that we did not get to at least provide video options for our audience to ask any questions, but we are at a time here today. I do encourage, some of you in the audience who had questions that we didn't get to reach out to us or ask Carr to put us in touch if you want quick answers. Thank you so much, Katelyn, Mike, Eduardo. It was a pleasure to moderate the session. Thank you all to the audience. Thanks again. Big thanks to Carr for putting on a great NACW 2021 virtual style. And again, hopefully we all come to sunny California next year, 2022. And let's just keep on going. A big, good day for climate and carbon markets. And hopefully another good day, week, months ahead for all of us. Take care. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.